Welcome to Sincerely Me, a podcast about self-discovery and inner work so you can cultivate a deeper relationship to yourself and show up more fully in your work and life. My name is Tallia and I'm honored to be your host. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited to be sharing this conversation with you guys. I had the pleasure of chatting with Veronica Roth, who is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of the Divergent series. You've probably seen the movies, in addition to some of her other books, Carve the Mark, The Fates Divide, The End and Other Beginnings, and she has just released on April 7th her debut adult novel, The Chosen Ones. And why Veronica and I decided to connect for this podcast was because in her new book, she explores a lot of themes that are super relevant to inner work and self-discovery, the way we talk about on the podcast here on Sincerely Me. And the central question she explores through her book, The Chosen Ones, is what happens after you save the world? So the book basically follows this group of folks who saved the world 10 years ago and are kind of grappling with life after success. What do you do? What's next? How do you redefine success? What do you do when you've kind of already fulfilled your purpose? What does that even mean, right? And so lots to discuss here with Veronica today, and cannot wait for you all to dive in. We talk a little bit about a lot of things, as I probably say with every episode, but really it's a conversation about doing your best with what you have and recognizing that your first journey is not your last, that there is life after you reach your goals, and that it's important to, at some point, kind of take a step back and redefine what you actually want success to look like for yourself, because many of us think it looks a certain way, and once we get there, we realize it's not really all that it's kind of been talked up to be, right? And so she talks about the importance of focusing on what you can control. We talk a lot about emotional honesty, taking ownership of your successes, releasing comparison, letting go of expectations, and a whole lot more. Veronica's book is also a featured novel for this month in the Inner Work Book Club. As you all know, we choose a book every month that is in the category of self-help and personal development. So we don't typically read any novels. However, whenever one does come around that hits so beautifully on topics that are so real and important to the human experience, we do feature it in our community as a must read. So go ahead and check out all the details for the Inner Work Book Club to get all the resources and support you need on your own journey as you navigate success and failure and all the things in between. Head over to talliadelju.com/book club. We would love to see you there. In the spirit of supporting one another and in the spirit of community and connection, what I'm also going to do is offer anyone who's listening a free month into the book club. All you have to do to get that link to join for your first month free from me is subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. DM me a screenshot of your review on Instagram at Tallia Delju, and I will personally and happily send you a link to join the book club and get access for your first month free. Alrighty, without further ado, here is my conversation with the lovely Veronica Roth. Veronica, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I cannot wait to dive into the topics we have laid out for us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So before we got started, I asked you, what's like one main message or takeaway you want to share with the audience? And you said that your first journey is not the last, that there is a life after you reach your goals, after you get quote unquote there. There's still life. There's still more to be experienced, to be explored, to be discovered. And I would love to first ask you about your own journey and how you, as an author of some incredible books, including the Divergent series, how have you come to define success, and how have you found life after you've achieved your quote unquote goals down on paper? What has the path looked like for you?
Well, it's a little hard to look back because I never really defined my career goals, because everything happened so quickly, there was really no chance for me to consider where I wanted to go or what I wanted my career to look like. I just felt like I started tumbling downhill. And that's, I
The
mean, not downhill in the bad sense, but just like with that sense of,
momentum, right.
yeah, the momentum, like the gravity of
Mhm.
it just pulled me with it. And I was like, okay. And so for the first few years of my career with the Divergent books, like it was a really wonderful and incredible experience, but it was also just constant maintenance of my like current situation without a whole lot of consideration for where I was headed.
Right.
And so for me, I kind of blew through a bunch of the goals I might have defined if someone had asked me, hitting the bestseller list or having your work adapted. Like those are things I might have articulated, but I never really got the chance to. So a lot of what's happened in the aftermath of Divergent is figuring out what's actually important to me now that all that stuff is like over and done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that you said there that I loved, that I think is important to note is that uh, we we tend to almost like overemphasize the importance of goals in many ways. And what I'm hearing you say too is that like you creatively put out this part of you throughout, through as it was expressed through a book, and it kind of just took off and you just followed that momentum and the gravity that kind of pulled you into what was next and what was next and what was next. And I'm sure for you it took a lot of, I assume, just like trusting in that process that what I'm here to do, my responsibility is to do my best work to create things that mean something and to just trust that it's going to get me to where I want to be and that it's going to naturally kind of unfold as it's meant to.
Yeah, when I was young, I had a problem with stress. I mean, I have an anxiety disorder, just for context. So
Mhm.
I've always been just like a very intense kind of personality. And my mom would tell me to soothe me. She would say, like, don't look at the big picture, because that's what's stressing you out. Is the immensity of like what you're up against. Like you've got this massive pile of homework or this huge test coming, or because it was usually about
Right.
school. And she would say, just take it one step at a time, which is a very simple piece of advice. But I think I took that approach to my career. It was like, okay, what's in front of me right now, and how do I
Mhm.
want to handle it? Which I think was a good way of coping, but it also didn't leave me a lot of room for strategy, which I think is an important thing to
Mhm.
learn how to how to figure out how to have
Yeah.
career strategy and life
Mhm.
strategy. But yeah.
Absolutely. How have you found the balance between that then, between like trusting, going with the momentum, going with the flow, while also thinking ahead, strategizing, having some sort of plan in terms of like where it's all leading to?
Well, I focus a lot now on the things I can control. So, what I can't control is how my work is received, what kind of external factors of success I receive as a result of that work, like hitting a bestseller list or even like reaching a particular sales number. Like, those are things that are really outside of my grasp. But what is
Mhm.
in my grasp is my creative life and how ambitious I am there and how fulfilled I am there. And so, as long as I chase that creative fulfillment, I have decided that I shouldn't care what the results of it are.
So hard.
Yes, almost impossible. I mean, but there's a great quote from that book, Yes, Please, by Amy Poehler, where
Mhm.
she talks about how the most successful people in her life are the people who have been able to, insofar as it's possible, separate themselves from the results of their work and focus on the work itself,
Yeah.
which I have really taken, I carry that around with me quite a bit.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And I'm sure it's a practice that takes a lot of effort.
Yeah, it's like just having to constantly redirect your
Right.
thoughts.
Exactly. Exactly. Because we're wired for that type of validation and feedback and okay, well, what do people think? And I'm sure too, just as a creative, that those types of thoughts without a doubt get in the way of the creativity flowing freely and fully, I'm sure.
Yeah, and you'll never get rid of them, but the important thing is to let your voice, like, what do I think, be the
Hmm.
loudest one. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I love that. Yeah, letting your voice be the loudest, because there are plenty of other voices in all of our minds that can tend to become the primary at one point or another.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about your upcoming book, because I know from the little that I know, I haven't read it yet, but from the little that I know, it is about a group of folks who, and I'll let you kind of explain in more detail, but the central question that this book explores is, again, like, what happens next? What happens after success and power are achieved? So share a little bit more about the book and the storyline and how you explore this idea through the story that you've created.
Sure, yeah. So basically, when I was growing up, I read a lot of Chosen One stories and watched a lot of Chosen One stories, which we all do if you've ever enjoyed, Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or anything. They're all that kind of story. Um, and so I wanted to write about the story that comes after that story. So the book is about a group of people who are about 30 years old, and 10 years ago, they took down a kind of dark lord figure who was hell bent on destroying the world. And now, it's 10 years later and they're still dealing with the kind of traumatic aftermath of that,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to navigate a world in which they are more famous than anyone has ever been in the history of mankind. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a playful take on a lot of genre tropes that we see a lot, but then also trying to take seriously the psychological impact of what this would be like to have achieved such an important thing that you can really never top. Like, can you ever top saving the world?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's such a human challenge, and I think that's what keeps people on the hamster wheel, is like, you get the dream job, you finally get paid what it is you've always dreamed about getting paid, you get the dream house, the dream partner, the dream whatever, you're checking and checking and checking each and every box, and then what? Like,
Yeah.
what is it ever enough? Like, I guess that's the question that I would love for us to dig into a little bit, is like, what is enough, and how do you, in moments of, okay, the last box is checked, I think for a lot of people, it's almost this like forced pause where you have to reevaluate how you've come to define success, how you've come to define power and achievement, and really who you are. Um, because I would assume it's in those moments where you recognize all the things that I've worked for, as much as it looks great on paper, like, I'm still not happy. I'm still not fulfilled. There's something that's still missing.
Yeah, I think people kind of postpone happiness. Like, well, I'll feel better and happier and I'll feel okay once I get to this place or this day or this thing. And I do that all the time. And I
Mhm.
have to remind myself that you're just going to wear away at your life that way, if you can't be present a little bit more, which of course,
Mhm.
like the anxious mind, like that's the last place that it
Right.
wants to be is in
Yeah.
the present. It either wants to be in the past or the future.
Right.
So this is like the main struggle of my emotional life and my work life and
Mhm.
my creative life, every part of my life.
Yeah. So without giving too much away, how do the characters in the book find, I don't know if relief is the right word, but where does the resolution come for them as they're trying to navigate life post saving the world?
Well, my main character, her name is Sloane, and she has reacted to all of this with a lot of bitterness, and also with, I mean, she has a serious case of PTSD, and she articulates a couple times throughout the book that she doesn't know what she wants. She basically wants to be left alone. And I think her journey of like exploring what her deepest desires are and then encountering that sometimes she doesn't like what they are. That's kind of the main central journey of the book. Like she kind of figures this out through it's a fantasy book, so a little bit of magic and stuff, but the focus is always on her her emotional connection to herself, to the magical force that she is learning how to use, and all of that. Just figuring out what you want on a deeper level, I think, is
Mhm.
kind of the conclusion of the book. If I had to pick one.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, that points to what we said earlier, where it's like we think we want all these things, whether it's out of obligation, responsibility, expectation. And then once we have them all, we're forced to actually turn inward and ask ourselves, what really matters to you? What do you actually want on like a deep, deep, deep heart level, without fear, without judgment, without assumptions, without doubts? And that's a scary place for a lot of people, because they've gotten to where they are, and it's safe to assume like you've gotten to where you are because you've achieved success in many ways, and however you've achieved success has worked for you. So to question that and to find a different way of defining yourself or defining success can be super scary, because it's like the foundation, the ground beneath you begins to shake, and it's like, okay, well, is that true? Is that true for me? What will life look like if I don't believe these things anymore? And what do I believe? And like it just
Hmm.
brings up so many questions. Um and so it sounds like from what you just said, her journey is a bit of that, the journey inward, where she's forced to kind of cultivate a deeper relationship to herself and ask herself some tough questions.
Yeah, and a lot of it is also about what I find to be one of the central struggles of adulthood, which is accepting that the choices that you make have a cost, and that every
Mhm.
time you say yes to one thing, you do say no to other things. Like,
Mhm.
I got married really young. I got married at 22, which I guess is not really young in the history of the world. But for me, it was pretty young. And I feel like if you're going to do that, you have to accept that you're saying no to your 20s being full of like romantic interludes and adventure
Right.
in certain ways, but you're saying yes to this thing that can give you deep fulfillment if you
Mhm.
know what it is that you're looking for. So um, I have always thought about this in terms of like, it's okay that the things that you want have a cost, but you have to know what that cost is and decide whether you're willing to pay it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I talk a lot about, in terms of like in times of having to make a decision, it's looking at your, not even pros and cons, but like what do you have to gain? What do you have to lose? Looking at the flip side, right? You're saying yes to this means you're saying no to this. You're saying no to this means you're saying yes to this. And like looking at things from all sides before taking action.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, and then taking ownership and responsibility for what happens after you make that choice.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, and refusing to make a choice is a choice. So
Yeah,
that's also an important thing to note. I have
totally.
found.
Yeah, choosing no choice.
Yeah, inaction or inertia,
Right.
basically.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so another idea, or I guess topic I'd love to explore, is fame. I didn't think it would be something we would talk about, but it sounds like the biggest thing that's changed for this group of people is, post saving the world, they're learning how to navigate fame, learning how to navigate being visible and exposed into the world. Uh,
Hmm.
so, can you share a little bit more about, I guess, the experience of fame and how they're experiencing it, and what that's either doing for them or teaching them, and yeah, what opportunities arise in the experience of fame that they're having.
Sure, yeah. So the book opens with a celebrity profile of the main character, Sloane, and it is pretty misogynistic. It
Mhm.
describes her in this it sexualizes her and in an uncomfortable way. And, I mean, he like basically falls short of asking or telling her to smile, but like that's kind of the vibe of it.
Right.
And so right off the bat, it's clear that Sloane's relationship to fame is uh, pretty fraught. She is like very intentionally made herself into the antagonist of her own story, and she hates it and resents it. But then there are four of her friends who also save the world with her, and they all relate to it in a different way. So one of them has started like a lifestyle brand on
Yep.
a fake version of Instagram, and she's decided to embrace it. And then Sloane's fiance, Matt, has decided that it's given him a lot of responsibility, and so he's determined to do something good with it. And I
Mhm.
almost feel like these are like archetypes of like how people
Totally.
who become famous when they're young, like how they process it. I mean, obviously in an exaggerated way.
Mhm.
um, but they're also, I mean, it was also kind of personal because I was never world famous, obviously, but I did become pretty well known really rapidly, and my I reacted to it in all of these ways. You know,
Yeah.
I had resentment about it, but I also saw it as giving me a lot of responsibility to do something good in the world. And then
Mhm.
I also kind of loved it and relished it. So
Yeah.
it was like splitting myself into pieces and then just like blowing those pieces up so they were exaggerated. That's kind
Yeah.
of how it worked with these characters.
I love that. That is so fascinating to me. I'm so curious after hearing you say that because my next question was going to be, how have you experienced fame? But what I'd love to know too is, again, I'm not an author, so this is kind of coming from a place of assumption, but I would I would assume that putting all these parts and pieces of yourself into these characters can be cathartic, can be healing, can help you process things for yourself as well. So, what's
Hmm.
something that you came to learn about yourself in the process of creating these characters, in the process of writing this book? Like, how did it change you, and what maybe healing came from it for you?
Well, I think a lot of it was catharsis. Just maybe it would be more accurate to say that it was like emotional honesty. So
Mm,
I, because everything that happened to me was so good. I mean, it was so good for my career and for my life in general, in really tangible and clear ways. And it was something that anyone would be lucky to have happen to them. You know, your three books get adapted into movies. That's bananas. That never happens. So
mhm,
I was so focused on being appreciative and grateful that I forgot to let myself feel negatively about it, really. And
mhm,
I did. There were parts of it that were not great. And it was really nice through this book to acknowledge them and to tell myself like it's okay. You don't have to be grateful all the time. Like
yeah,
it's important to acknowledge that and that you experience a lot of privilege in the world and that you've had a really good run of things. But
mhm,
when people mistreat you, it's also okay to get angry about that.
yeah,
So I think with Sloane, I mean, she's kind of an angry character, but that was important to me because I think for women in particular, it's really hard for us to feel like we can ever be angry about anything because you're
mm,
kind of immediately perceived in this very negative way
yeah,
if you dare to express any discontent with how
mhm,
things have gone for you.
yeah, absolutely. And what I see a lot too in my coaching work is that people tend to look on their successes and feel guilty for feeling anything but grateful.
Yeah.
And and that they tend, and I'm not saying this is happening for you, but I'm curious, for a lot of folks, they'll look back on a success and kind of not take ownership over it from a place, like from an internal place, but they might attribute their success to luck or to timing or to, oh well, I had a great, publisher, or I had a great editor. So they look to everyone else and attribute their success to all these things outside of themselves without actually taking some credit and ownership for the part they played in the creation of whatever it is they put into the world. So I'm curious how that's been for you.
I feel like you must have had a secret conversation with my therapist because I literally, in my notebook right here, I have for my last session with her, it says, stop telling people that you were lucky.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Because, like, I was obviously, like,
Sure.
that's a part of anyone's success is luck. So
Yeah.
you don't need to acknowledge it quite to the extent that I have been.
Yeah,
um,
or it's not like either or, right? You can, I worked hard, I am a good writer, I got lucky, and like they can all coexist together.
Yes.
But I agree with your therapist.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you have to take ownership for the good as well as the bad,
Yeah.
because either you're someone who's totally at the whim of the world and nothing you do has any effect and you should never feel bad about anything you have ever done, or
Mhm.
or you actually are in charge of a lot of
Yeah,
things, good and bad.
totally. Totally. So my next question is, how do you, and I'm sure this is an experience that the characters may have also had in the book, like how have you managed and navigated pressure and expectation as you continue to write books after the first one, second, like every time you put out a book, there's I'm sure a new found sense of like, okay, what's the next one going to be? um,
Hmm.
and how do you, to use your words earlier, it's like how do you top yourself when you've already saved the world, right? So what is that, how has that come to manifest for you in terms of the pressure and expectation you feel after each success?
Well, I think it's a little funny to think about this right now, but I think I've kind of mirrored my two main characters, Sloane and Matt. Matt, who takes responsibility for everything and tries to meet everyone's expectations, and Sloane, who says, "Screw all your expectations. I'm not going to meet any expectations."
Yeah.
That's kind of I yo-yo a little bit between those two extremes, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But on my best days, I think I consider very carefully what my expectations are.
Yeah.
Um, and I try to listen to those. But,
Mm-hmm.
I don't I don't live in those good best moments all the time.
Yeah.
Or even most of the time. But
Yeah.
yeah. But I do have them sometimes.
Totally. And I guess what this relates to for me, my mind is comparison. Whether it's
Yeah.
comparing your work to your previous work or comparing your work to other people's work, how has comparison come to show up in your journey?
Whoa, it's just constant. I mean,
Yeah.
I try not to let it be. Eyes on your own paper is like something I repeat to
Yeah.
myself a lot.
Hmm.
But you can compare yourself to other people doing your work this in a similar job, at the same time, other authors, other books, how do they perform? Like what kind of treatment are they getting from their publishers? That kind of stuff. And then also, I mean, I see that Divergent casts like a long shadow for me in terms of performance, like sales. Um, and it was a very special moment that will probably never happen again, which
Hmm.
has been a hard thing to process because I could spend my life chasing that, but I'd rather not, um,
Yeah.
because I would rather just let that be a really special time in my life.
Mhm.
And that I will have other special times, but they will be different. And I think accepting that and appreciating it, not feeling negatively about that not happening again, has been the focus of the last few years for me.
Yeah, I that is like such a light bulb moment for me right there. So I want to revisit it just to like hit it home. So what you said there is that when you try to top a previous experience, you're almost like taking away from the magic of it.
Yeah, I remember there was a moment I was in a fancy dress. I was like at the movie premiere, and it was like my most I don't know. I was like surrounded by fancy people.
Mhm.
And I looked around and I was like, I need to take stock because this will never feel this way again. Like, even if they made two movies after that point, but that first time feels a special way.
Mhm.
And it just can't be recaptured. And that's okay. Like, a lot of things in life that are really special are just temporary. You can't recapture them.
Mhm.
But if you chase that your whole life, you won't be happy with the new and different things that come your way.
Totally. And I think that's what our minds mess up, is that we think we use what happened as the like standard of the best thing that can happen, and this is it, and if it's not that, then it's going to be worse, without recognizing like, no, there could be something completely different that's maybe better, maybe not better, but just different.
Yeah.
Um and you trying to recreate it is you taking up space that might otherwise be needed for some other incredible positive experience to show up for you.
Yeah, definitely. I think people do that with long-term relationships too. Like just
Yeah.
because you don't get that rush of feeling at the beginning, anymore, and you won't ever again, doesn't mean that you haven't also gotten these like amazing and incredible and deeper, though less acute experiences.
Totally. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So many good things happening in this conversation. I love it. What else? So tell us a little bit more about, I know your book is getting released on April 7th, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So tell everyone how they can support you, where they can find it, where to go, and what to be on the lookout for from you.
Well, it's an interesting question because we are currently in the beginning stages of coronavirus kind of
Lockdown.
quarantine. Yes, voluntary quarantine. And so the best way to support any author right now is to buy their books, basically.
Mhm.
But specifically, I think our industry is going to suffer as a result of this because we rely a lot on independent bookstores for being good voices in the book community, as well as just a place that you can get books. So if you can order the book from your local independent bookstore, that is
Yeah.
the best possible way to support any author that you're interested in right now. But you can also find me at veronicarothbooks.com and on Instagram, where I'm
Awesome.
on VRothBooks. And
Yeah.
I do a lot on there. So, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. I'll link all of that in the show notes to make sure people know where and how to find you and support your work.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the two questions I want to ask in closing, even though I feel like we could talk for a lot longer,
Mm-hmm.
are firstly, what does it mean, and whether this is in the context of your characters, the books you've written, or in your own personal life, what to you does it mean to live a life of significance?
Oof, man, you told me that you were going to ask me this. And I thought about it the whole time. I'm still like, oh my God. I think, man, I think a lot about, again, I think about what my mom kind of said to me when I was young is don't look at the huge things so much. Think about what you're doing right now and do your best.
Mhm.
And I could have a lot of high-minded ideas about what a life of significance means, but really what I think what I think about it is that every day I wake up and I try to do my best with what's in front of me.
Mm.
And sometimes I do a good job and sometimes I don't. And I still have to wake up the next day.
Yeah.
God willing.
Mhm.
So I think for me, that's kind of what it is.
I love that. Doing your best with what you have at any given moment.
Yes.
Awesome. And in the spirit of the podcast, sincerely me, I always ask my guests, if you were to write a letter to yourself right now in this moment, what is one thing you would want to say to yourself?
Ooh. Every time I'm asked this, I'm like, is this some kind of time travel situation where I like alter the past by writing to myself? Sorry, that's clearly a sci-fi writer over here. I think mostly what I want for myself is to be able to be more present and to not be so worried about the
Mhm.
future. And of course, that's like the ongoing struggle of being an
Yeah.
anxious person.
Mhm.
But there's so much good going on at any given time, and I don't want to miss it. So at any given moment, what I would say to myself is be present, not perfect, which is
Mhm.
a phrase that I really love. I think it's
Yeah.
like the Chicago Cubs motto right now. So perfect for me since that's where
Yeah.
I am. But yeah, be present.
Be present. Much easier said than done, and a
Sure.
lifelong practice that we can only hope to cultivate for ourselves. So I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome, Veronica. Well, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I cannot wait to see all the incredible work you continue to put out into the world, however that's expressed, whether it's through a book or something else. And I deeply appreciate the time that you shared with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, everyone. That was my conversation with Veronica. As she mentioned, the best way to support her and other authors and writers out there is to Get some books from your local independent bookstore. Also, be sure to check out Veronica on all social platforms. All of her information is linked in the show notes. And again, we would love to see you in the Inner Work Book Club. For all the information and details there, head over to talliadeljoux.com/book club, also linked for you in the show notes. This month in April, we're exploring authenticity, vulnerability, self-acceptance, and so many other super important themes as they relate to our betterment and our growth as people. As I mentioned in the intro, you can get your first month free into the book club by subscribing, rating, and reviewing the podcast. Just shoot me a DM with a screenshot of your review, and I'll send you an invite to join and get your first month free. Thank you all so much for joining this week. We'll catch you on the next episode. Sincerely, me.